welcome to Sid Caudle on this day of doom and gloom. Yeah, it's happened again, Sid. I think secretly we expected it. It happens every 4 years. And what can we do about it? Well, go on, tell us what we can do about this Argentinian defeat.
Well, at the end of the day, you have to admire Messi. As you asked me before, who do I think is the greatest footballer of all time? And I said to you, Lionel Messi, which you took issue with because you thought I should have said Pele. But I mean, Messi's actually scored more goals. I mean, what happened yesterday was that he created two goals, so he was, he got two assists. So he and that second goal, I mean, really, if that ball hadn't been absolutely pinpoint accurate, then the player wouldn't have scored the goal. But Messi just literally put it right onto his head. And brilliant performer, brilliant player. And quite honestly, the fact that he's now going to be in his third successive World Cup final, is an amazing tribute to his performance and his achievement. And quite honestly, the rest of the Argentinian team play round him. And, to me, it's just great to admire brilliant football.
Yeah, they were the better team overall. We've mentioned in the past that a little exaggerated and maybe a little unfair. Britain, England, I've got a team basically of two international superstars, and the rest are, in some cases, almost journeymen. Certainly, the defence has been suspect, and that's what got us again.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have to admit, though, that Jordan Pickford did perform brilliantly and did a number of amazing saves. So, we, he did well in goal. The defence in front of him was, I suppose, mediocre, but John Stones performed well. He performed fairly well. I mean, they weren't. You can't say, oh, the defence were appalling, and they didn't make serious mistakes. I mean, the two Argentinian goals were frankly brilliant goals. They weren't defensive errors.
No, that's true. The other thing that occurs to me about that match, of course, was the perennial behaviour of the Argentinians, which is getting out of hand on two bases. First of all, the cynical fouling, and the
Oh.
refereeing was truly appalling, especially in the first half.
Yeah, I mean, just right at the very beginning of the match. I mean, somebody just pushed Bellingham from behind when he was nowhere near the ball. And Bellingham turned around and just smiled and said, what sort of game are you playing? And that was, yes, in the first half, Argentinians fouling was terrible. But I think it's gamesmanship, I think, because they then want to make England players think they're going to be fouled all the time and almost afraid to stay on the ball. And later on in the game, they stopped it, and the players that they brought in didn't engage in that cynical fouling. And they actually improved dramatically as a team, Argentina, when they stopped doing that.
Well, there was no excuse at the end of the match for displaying that banner. In fact, the FA, FIFA in this case, are both to blame. That banner is illegal. Will the FIFA organization climb out of its corruption and actually do what is in the rules and penalize heavily Argentina, saying the Malvinas is ours? That was terrible.
Well, to be honest with you, I like Malay. I think he's a great president of Argentina, and his attitude towards Israel is wonderful, and his economic policies are great. But I don't know why he's got this fixation over the Falklands. I mean, at the end of the day, the main principle is that people should have a right to self-determination, and the people living on the Falklands want to be part of Great Britain. So he's got no one's got any right to just to say, oh, sorry, you can't live on these islands anymore. We're removing you from these islands. We're taking them over. It's wrong, totally wrong. And while we're talking like this, we can say it's also totally wrong what's happened to the Chagos Islands because they've removed the indigenous inhabitants from that, and now they want to hand the islands to Mauritius. It's wrong. The people that live there should have a right to decide what they want to be part of.
Keep your eyes open for Gibraltar just down the road from here, Sid. I have got many Gibraltar friends. We know the system there, and they've been sucked in. And they've been sucked in to this open border with the EU. That means Spain. Because, oh, we won't have enough workers for the hospital. We won't have enough building workers, etc. Yeah, link that to Britain as well.
Well,
Basically, actual rule, which has been pushed by Starmer again, of Chagos Island fame, says that the EU now controls the border and there will be only Spanish police on the border. And if we want to push any of our armaments around within the curtilage of Gibraltar, you have to get Spanish permission first. Now, think
yeah.
about that. That's one step away from eventually Spain getting what they want, which is Gibraltar, with absolutely no rights of self-determination. Because all Spain will do, decade, 5 decades in the future, is go to an international court who will rule in their favour. It's very dangerous. Sir Keir, who is masterminding going abroad and not doing anything in Britain, does actually more damage abroad than he's done in Britain, if that was possible.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. And it's been very noticeable that Keir Starmer has not put the UK first. He is very much an internationalist. He's totally in favour of international law, whatever that means, which is supposed to be advisory, but he doesn't think it's advisory at all. He thinks that the UK has to do whatever international courts say without any question. I mean, and when it came to the war in Iran, I mean, he turned around to Trump and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, but we've got to decide whether this is correct under international law before I can make a comment." It's just like, I can't allow you to use British bases because I'm not convinced that you have a right under international law to bomb Iran. That's what he said. It's just like everything is international law, and you're quite right over Gibraltar. He's just basically giving up on Gibraltar because he doesn't believe we have a right to Gibraltar under international law. What utter nonsense.
And in following that, of course, we had his resignation speech in Parliament yesterday. And he's been called this before, but I will reiterate it, having heard the thing. He's completely delusional. To anybody to stand there saying we are now better off after 2 years under his rule is delusional, Sid.
Well, it's just simply not true. I mean, whatever test you put, I mean, growth is anemic. I mean, growth under Starmer has been 1% a year. It averaged 2% a year under the Conservatives before COVID, and he condemned that as awful. Debt is up. It's up about 9 billion. The deficit, that's the rate at which the debt is increasing, is up. Tax has gone up enormously. It's gone up by 70 billion, where the Labour manifesto said they'd increase it by no more than 9 billion. Inflation's gone up. He inherited it at 2%. It's now 2.8%. Unemployment's gone up. He inherited it at 4.3%. It's now 4.9%. The illegal crossings have gone up significantly. Before he came in, it was 31,000 a year. It's now 39,000 a year. I mean, whatever test you put, and say, on what grounds are we better off now than we were before? There's no ground which he can point to, which he can say, this shows that we are better off. The only thing he can do is to say, well, in the last 3 months, the growth we've had has been the best in the G7. But you don't take growth over 3 months. You take growth over a year. And if you take growth over a year, in the United States, they've had growth of 2.6% over the past year. On no grounds are we better, have we got the best growth in the G7. It's just nonsense. It's just manipulation of statistics.
Yes, it's called lies as well. And
Mm,
yeah, having said that, um, it's all down to basic philosophy.
mm,
You've got to ask yourself where we are at the moment with socialism, because it ain't the socialism that we grew up with, Sid. It has changed radically. And the radical change is that its roots, which is communism, are
mm.
really coming to the fore. We have got a form of communism now in the United Kingdom. Is that stretching it?
Well, I think we've got to look at this in two ways. I mean, one of the roots of communism and the roots of socialism are state control. And state control can take two different forms. One form is economics, and the other is social. Now, if we look first at the economics, then the economics is basically, well, what's actually happened this week is that the Labour Party have decided that they're taking over British Steel. So British Steel is now going to be state-owned. They've decided they're taking over the railways, so all the railways are going to be state-owned. They're taking over the water companies, so all the water companies are going to be state-owned. Now, all these things are things that were previously privatised under private control. Now, when they become state-owned, if it's anything like what happened in the 1970s, they'll be significantly worse than they were under private control. But that's beside the point. The point is, it's all taking industry under state control. That is communism, that is socialism under economics. The other side is social. And by social, I mean promoting what I would call new age social dogma, which basically means promoting transsexualism, promoting homosexuality, promoting abortion, promoting all these things, which you find in China, which you find in communist countries, which are very much a part, if you like, of the social side of Marxism. But it's also part of New Age dogma. And it's that they are pushing in this country. They aren't getting all their own way. The Supreme Courts have ruled that there are only two sexes. The Supreme Court in this country has ruled there's only two sexes, a man and a woman. But the Labour Party is struggling with this concept because they don't believe the concept that there is only a man and a woman. So even though they've actually ruled that you can't give pills to children, to cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers because they're harmful. But the Labour Party have decided, even though there's been that ruling, they're going to engage in some research, and the research is going to go to children as young as 11 to see whether, in reality, that puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones can be shown to be not harmful. I mean, they've got all the evidence they need. They don't need more research. This is just a way of bringing it all in through the back door. But frankly, they're doing this all the time, and they're doing it deceptively and in a way that is very harmful to society.
Let's get to the base point here. You have got the Judeo-Christian principle that God is in charge, and if we allow him, because he's given us this wonderful thing called free will, then he can cope with the situation, whether it be economic or whatever. Now, the principle of socialism, no, it didn't start that way, that's true, but it's certainly that way now, is that man can solve the problems. Clearly, he can't, Sid.
Well, yes, I think the climate issue shows that brilliantly, because we believe God created the world, and we believe God is in charge of his creation. They said of Jesus, "Who is this that the wind and the waves obey him?" He showed that he was Lord over nature. Now, what the socialists want to tell us is that man controls nature. and that if we can reduce carbon emissions, then we'll have a safer world and we'll do away with global warming. And incidentally, when they started in 1970 with all this, they weren't talking about global warming, they're talking about global cooling. They were prophesying an ice age by the year 2000. It was only in 1988 that they changed from global cooling to global warming. So they can't actually decide what the problem is. But whatever problem it is, they say man has to solve it by reducing carbon emissions. Well, that itself is nonsense because carbon is actually good for the environment. It's not bad. And we don't actually need to reduce carbon emissions at all. What we needed to reduce was sulfur emissions from coal. That was what was causing smogs, and that was harmful. Carbon is not harmful. So the whole agenda is just frankly nonsense. But it's the agenda is there in order to create a need for a one world government. Because you see, Britain on its own can never solve the climate problem, and no country on its own can solve a climate problem. The only way you can solve a climate problem, if one existed, is for all the nations of the world to come together. So they create this climate problem, which is actually a climate hoax, in order to create a need for a one world government, so all the nations of the world have to come together. That's what's going on. It's just deception. They say that man controls the environment, but he doesn't. God controls the environment, and God controls every aspect of society.
That's worth thinking about and taking some time apart to think about. It's fascinating what's going on at the moment because clearly we have a society, not just in the last 2 years, that's gone down the slippery slope. It's been going that way, arguably, from the 60s and 70s. And one wonders what happened then. Did man decide in the form of woman to bring problems from the United States in the guise of feminism to release the world, the feminist world anyway? And it moved on, as you said, to abortion, to euthanasia, indeed, which is very fashionable at the moment. It's a frightening world, Sid.
Well, yes and no. I mean, at the end of the day, we know that God is in ultimate control. And we have the final say. Ultimately, it says in the scriptures that all the nations of the world will come against Israel, and Israel will be defeated. And at that moment, Jesus will return to the Mount of Olives, and every eye will see him. And it's just like, okay, we're going to face what appears to be defeat, but at the moment of defeat will be victory. And Jesus has the final say, and Jesus will come and reign on earth for 1,000 years, and we're going to be part of it. So, it's they can, as much as they like, try and say, we're taking control, we're taking authority, we're going to crush Christians, we're going to crush Christianity. They will fail. Every knee will bow before Jesus.
Here we go. That's good news, folk, for everybody. Short and sweet today. Well, short, sweet. No, that's a terrible defeat by the dear old Argentinians. But can I say finally, Sid, we don't say, right, let's go and fly into the Argentine up the river there and get our own back. And I say this as a parting shot, really. And we're talking about the ultra left wing now. Wasn't it horrible about the sad demise of Anne Widdecombe and the postings on the internet saying good riddance? I hope you had a lot of pain when you were being beaten round the head. Can you ever square a circle like that? Sid, it's from the left. There's a real problem.
Yes, but if I could say very quickly about Anne Widdecombe, I admire her intellectual integrity. And she was able to talk to people that were completely opposite political opinions and debate with them and often completely destroy them intellectually. She never engaged in any personal attacks. And she was tremendous credit to the political profession, frankly. But what I saw on the BBC was utterly disgusting. They brought this 21-year-old girl on who was LGBT, was pro-abortion, and she just started to attack Anne Widdecombe. because of her points of view. Um, you know, and it was just completely and utterly inappropriate. The BBC knew exactly what they were doing, and what they were doing was frankly totally against their charter.
Yeah, and I wonder, finally, whether GB News will be dead keen to have Peter Tatchell on there. They do it for some sort of balance, I suppose, with Ofcom behind them, looking at what they're getting up to. But for him to come out and say, basically, Anne Widdecombe, you're a bigot and well gone, that is totally terrible. Interesting to think what GB News will have on next time. Will they have Tatchell back on again?
Well, I hope not. You see, but it's quite interesting, isn't it? That, I mean, Dan Wootton, who I admired enormously, was deplatformed, as were some other people, deplatformed from GB News because they didn't like their point of view. So if they can deplatform people on the right, they can deplatform people on the left, and certainly Peter Tatchell should not be allowed on GB News again. Yes.
Well done. Thanks, Sid. We will see you very shortly.